and welcome to Macros with Mythili, the ET Now show that takes a hard look at all the major macroeconomic issues and developments in India and overseas. In this edition, we're going to take a hard look at an issue that successive governments have shied away from: labour reform. Back in 1969, P.C. Mahalanobis, father of the second five-year plan, calling our labour laws the most protectionist in the whole world, presciently added that the present form of protection of organised labour, which constitutes just about 5 or 6% of the whole population of the country, would operate as an obstacle to growth. If you compare where India is today with where the East Asian tigers are, Mahalanobis, it would appear, was bang on. Ironically, it's not just the larger macroeconomy that has lost out in the process, but labour itself, as evidenced by the rising informality of the Indian labour force, that has resulted in the overwhelming majority of our workers having virtually no rights. How do we get out of this conundrum? Can we move from today's what I would call lose-lose situation to a win-win scenario where both the country and labour benefit? Joining me in the discussion are three experts: Pradeep Bhargava, former chairman, CII National Industrial Relations Committee and President, Maratha Chamber of Commerce, Pune; Abhi Ghosh, former bureaucrat and ILO official; and Gautam Modi, General Secretary, New Trade Union Initiative. Welcome to the show, all three of you. Let me start by asking all three of you a question, rather two questions, that will set the stage for the rest of our discussion. One, do we need a complete overhaul of labour markets as they are today? And two, is this the most opportune time for the Modi government to pick up this political hot potato, given that it has the numbers and has also shown a willingness to go in for tough measures in the past, courtesy, as we saw, demonetization, GST being two examples? Let me start with you, Pradeep.
I'll answer your second question first. Yes, this is the opportune time. I don't think we have had a better occasion, not because of the thumping majority that this government got. I think it's important to understand the context that what we are seeing today is a manifestation of what NDA 1 had actually initiated 5 years ago. And if you were to use the word nation and the labor, and I would like to bring in a perspective, yes, equity, social justice for labor is important. So is the ease of doing business, competitiveness for the industry, which ultimately benefits the country. So I'm going to put it there. I think the time is right. Now, what do we want to convey as the most important? Absolutely every single of the four codes that have been talked about, which is merger of 44 laws earlier, is a step in the right direction. And I would say it's only a stage setting. We have to do much more.
Okay, so we'll come to the details a little later, but Abhi, do you agree? And would you agree that lack of labour reform is in fact one of the biggest obstacles to employment creation? Abhi?
Yes, I think labour law reforms are extremely important and critical at this juncture. Not just because this is the opportunity for the government to roll out the reforms because of the majority that has recently gathered, but also because it is extremely important for giving that impression that the labour reforms are for both employers and employees alike, because it has the exercise has gone through a tripartite process. It has been largely supported by the tripartite constituency, and therefore reforms have to go through. These are unexceptionable reforms. They are progressive reforms in many ways. Not that there are no doubts or no issues, but by and large they are very progressive and they should be gone through.
Okay, so Gautam, both the other experts feel that you just cannot avoid labour reform because of the three factors of production: land, labour and capital. Capital markets alone really have been reformed, whereas labour markets have really stayed virtually unreformed and today have become perhaps the biggest obstacle to employment creation. Would you agree with that assessment, Gautam?
Well, one, let me begin by saying I don't think we're experts. We all represent specific constituencies. So I think we should be very clear about that. And there isn't a shred of evidence that the lack of so-called labour reform has hampered economic growth. Certainly not labour reform in the form that's being talked about. I mean, if one looks at actually the economy over 20 years, the share of wages in the economy in the national product has declined, and demand has actually shifted to the richer section of the population. What this country needs is indeed labor reform. Labor reform that is more regulation of health and safety, more regulation of work practices, more regulation to improve technology and innovation, and higher minimum wages that will ensure that this country has better demand, which puts it on an completely higher structural growth path. What we are headed today for is absolutely to a race to the bottom, to a jungle Raj, where it's pretty free for all.
Okay, so we have a different perspective of labour reform coming from Gautam. But Pradeep, the government has made a beginning by codifying numerous laws. It has in fact introduced two key legislations, the Code on Wages Bill and the Code on Occupational Health, Safety and Working Conditions. But under the Constitution, labour is actually in the concurrent list. So is the union government's ability to meaningfully reform labour limited, Pradeep?
You know, this was a myth we all carried, that there is a federal and there are state subjects. GST is a live, brilliant example where something which was more closer to the hearts of the politicians and leaders in the state, they conceded and they came to a consensus. I think labor is one such subject which I think needs to be addressed. And frankly, I personally believe that center has to take the lead, make it happen in the centrally administered states, into state enterprises, into government jobs. And what we are seeing today is basic hygiene. Mythili, these are, I won't even call them reforms, because these were things that you were denied. Occupation health safety was denied, minimum wages were denied. I think they need to set the stage for a much bigger reform. So I don't think it will come in the way that because it's a state subject, concurrent subject, we should go ahead. GST proved it.
Oh, absolutely. GST, in fact, is an outstanding example of what can be replicated in many, many areas. Power, agriculture, labor, many of the areas that are definitely in the concurrent list, and some perhaps that are even solely in the state list. But Obi, the two bills are really expected to reduce the number of provisions in the labor laws from something like 747 at present to 203, as 17 labor laws are to be collapsed into these codes. How will this change things on the ground, both for workers and for employers? Will it make life easier for both, Obik?
You know, I didn't quite get the tenor of the question, but let me put it this way, that labor, you know, whatever reforms have now been introduced in terms of minimum wages and the occupational safety and health code bills, they, as I said, are basically salutary and progressive provisions. Minimum wages, you know, earlier it was applicable to only a few scheduled employments. The universal applicability of minimum wages is a step in the right direction. Our minimum wages, the way it is fixed, that has to be you know, examined a little more critically. But the idea of a national floor level minimum is a very good idea. The regional variations and regional flexibilities will allow the states to come in and within their competence, the concurrent list of subjects that they have, they are able to fix regional level wages, which should not be, of course, lower than the national floor level. So that takes care of the problem of whether the government of India should come in and take the lead, and the states have the freedom to fix minimum wages as per their regional levels of development.
Okay, so Gautam, are the trade unions worried about this beginning we made in labour reform? Also, the fact is that the organised sector labour is actually a very small, minuscule, less than 10% of the total labour force. So, if you really represent labour's interests and all labour's interests, should you not be fighting for the mass of the unorganised sector as well? So, what really are the trade unions' fears? Are they not elitist fears, Gautam?
I think it's completely incorrect to say that the trade unions are only fighting for a small minority. I think all progressive trade unions in this country fight for all workers and all workers together. The reforms that are being suggested in the name of universality are far from universal. All the two codes on the table and the two others in draft form continue with thresholds, so there's no question of universality. What's on offer in terms of the national minimum wage? We've already heard the voice of the executive raising the national floor wage, last year's floor wage, from 176 rupees to 178 rupees, by 2 rupees in a year, almost less than 1%. This in fact is the center using its power on a concurrent list to signal that the time has come to lower the bar for labor, not raise the bar for labor. It's setting an example to states that we're fine if you keep your minimum wage low. It's sending a very clear message to industry. We understand you need low wages. The endemic problem in our economy is we have very low wages, as a result of which 90% of this country actually consumes next to nothing, and it's the 10% that actually consumes everything. So this is not about 1%, 2%, 3% of the workforce. It's about 10% of the economy versus 90% of the economy, of the rich versus the poor. And what this government is doing is basically institutionalizing a legislative framework to keep the 90% where they are and create a bubble economy for the 10%.
Except that, Gautam, in about 70 years post-independence and so-called socialist rule, we really haven't seen the share of the organized sector increase. So why hasn't the share of the organized labor increased? If, as you say, 90% was disadvantaged, why are you not able to reach out to them, Gautam?
That there was socialist rule for 70 years is your ideological bugbear, not mine. We didn't have socialism for 70 years. And simplification of labor laws, is not about numbers, taking 13 laws into one or 99 into zero. The fact is we're today going to enter a point where we have actually next to no labor law. And talking about definitions, the great talk about simplification of definitions that the government and various people who support government have been claiming. In various laws we had a definition of worker, which indeed was open to interpretation by courts. Now all laws have a definition of worker and employee. So courts are going to spend years interpreting both those. And in fact, I can add that on equal work for equal pay will be decided on terms of skill, effort, experience, and responsibility. Let's look at the court time that's going to go into interpreting these four words.
No, Gautam, I'm with you on legal delays and judicial delays. But the fact is that I'm not with you on where we are today and where the Southeast Asian countries are. And one of the key differences really was labor flexibility. But I'm afraid it's time for us to slip into a very short break. But please do stay with us. We'll be back very soon to continue with this very fascinating discussion. Welcome back. You're watching Macros with Mythili, and I'm in discussion with three experts. Of course, Gautam refuted that they're all experts, but there are experts, to my mind, on the changes that the government is trying to bring about as far as labor reform is concerned. Pradeep, the biggest bone of contention really seems to be Chapter 5B of the Industrial Disputes Act, especially Sections 25O and N, that require any industry employing more than 100 workers to first take the state government approval before it can shut operations. Now, as everyone knows, no state government is likely to give you permission for fear of what it will cost them by way of votes at the next election. In fact, Arvind Panagaria, former Vice Chairman Niti Aayog, called it the biggest killer for employment on the grounds that investors are not going to enter an industry if they can't exit. According to him, India's pernicious set of labor laws is the reason why Indian firms have remained so small on average. Would you agree? I'm sure Gautam would disagree completely, but would you agree, Pradeep?
Oh, totally. Let me just again bring the context. What we are talking about, social security, minimum wages, occupational, Mythili, our hygiene, we need to go through it. Those are the base. But the fundamental question is, why is it that we don't have large enterprises? Why is it that we don't have large employment like our Southeast neighbor? And I'm going to take you to what is happening today with technology, aspiration, global competitiveness. The investment makers are not sure about their own complexion of their business, what they will be doing, how they'll be doing. We'll see what's happening in the automobile industry. So what do we do as investment? We take building on rent. We take equipment on lease. We take our white collar workers with understanding that they'll go up and down. But moment I take a blue collar worker, whatever happens to me, they are my permanent liability. They are my asset, but they become permanent. I cannot believe that for the sake of few people's permanence, organizations will certainly can't, as I said, you can't issue post-dated checks when you're not sure about the balance in your bank. As a result, flexibility in hiring is required as much as it is flexibility in discontinuing. And I think that's one major reasons we need to be getting into real reforms. I'm not talking about hire and fire, which is a crude way. I need flexibility, just the way, no flexibility in terms. There has to be dignity, there has to be fair wages, not minimum wages, there has got to be social security. But Absolutely, I cannot believe. Why is it that in Bangladesh has 40,000 workers per garment and we have not more than 4,000? Because an employer doesn't know. I think we need to acknowledge labor intensive industries people will never be able to do if they do not have the notional concept of flexibility.
I agree. Flexibility is very different from hire and fire. In fact, Pradeep pointed out a very relevant fact. The fact is that the idea was really meant to protect labor, but ended up really harming it as industrialists went in for capital rather than labor-intensive techniques of production, and then resorted to things like lockouts, etc. So can we have a law that balances the interests of both labor and capital, or do they always have to be adversarial? Abhi?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think industrial relations as it stands today does not have to be adversarial, because the idea of an industry is not to how to close it, it is to run the industry, and it has to be run with the cooperation of labor and capital and entrepreneurship and management. It all comes together. So, the idea is to find that winning formula which will keep industry afloat, it will help industry grow. If you want manufacturing industries to grow in this country, you have to have economies of scale. So, these are important things. Now, coming to the issue of hire and fire, if you like to put it that way, I do not think that is a very nice expression, but flexibility, the flexibility security debate, let us say. Now, question is what does the new law provide? I mean, it is still in the stage where the cabinet has not yet approved it, but we are aware of some of the provisions that it holds, and the issue of whether prior permission will be necessary for the 300 or more workers or 100 and more workers, these have become more academic, because if you look at the statistics, it is said that almost 70% of manufacturing industries employ less than 40 regular workers. So, if you take this figure and interpolate it and say that between 100 to 300 workers, the numbers are minuscule. It is not as if a large number of workers and a large number of industries will get affected. So, really speaking, it is an academic debate, and of course, the government will have to take the right kind of balanced view. But there are one or two good points in the flexibility security issue as it is coming up. For example, there is a section which is 9A of the Industrial Disputes Act, which requires prior notice of some 2 weeks before making any change in the conditions of work. That has been got rid of in the new code which is being drafted. So, these are good progressive measures that will help achieve some amount of flexibility.
Gautam, all everybody is asking for, I mean the other experts and I as anchor I am pleading for, is really flexibility. Then would you be against that? Would trade unions be against that? And if the idea is a stumbling block, can we keep that aside and go after some other low-hanging fruit which currently seems to be standing in the way of creating employment opportunities?
Well, first, let me agree that there can be no dispute about the fact that industrial relations should be harmonious, but workers are at the receiving end and respond to employer conduct. And today we are in a situation where employers close to bar one, there may be some small exceptions, are unwilling to accept workers' right to form trade unions. So, this industrial relations is what it is, adversarial today as it is, because employers want it such. They believe that adversity allows them to keep unions out, keep wages down, and turn over their workers at the speed they would like to. I don't think any progressive union would oppose flexibility. But the question is, what's the extent of flexibility? Indian employers and those who serve their political ends believe that flexibility should be 100%. You cannot innovate, you cannot be globally competitive if you have 100% flexible workforce, and anybody in manufacturing industry, including Mr. Bhargava, who I've had an opportunity to talk to at great length, would agree. Employers have through the standing order rule change on fixed term contracts, effectively got 100% flexibility. What's the flexibility they're looking at? Can they point out to us one area in which they've been globally competitive at the cutting edge and made the difference, like the East Asian tigers? The problem is with industry. The problem is with the attitude of industry. Can they point out one instance where they are not globally competitive because of workers? I mean, when one even looks at the economic survey, you look at finance ministry data, you look at industry ministry data. The reasons for lack of competitiveness are not workers. This is pure ideological humbug of capital wanting to oppress labor, and that's what the labor codes are about. They are not about talking across the aisle. There have been no adequate tripartite discussions, and today we have a government that is saying no standing committee, no review of enormous labor legislation which has been protected by reams of Supreme Court judgments. No standing committee. That what we're saying is no democracy when it comes to labor law.
Okay, Gautam, I would agree with you that Indian industry is uncompetitive, not only because of labor, but labor, I think, is a contributory factor. And I think, frankly, you would also agree, perhaps privately. But Pradeep, the government is in fact trying to do something about this by laying down a national minimum wage. Apart from the fact that wages vary hugely across states, and it's very difficult, in fact, to have a talk in terms of a single national minimum wage. In fact, one of the reasons why we see mass migration from the eastern and central states to the southern and the western states is precisely because wages vary. So is the idea of a national minimum wage a little absurd? Apart from which, what is the point of having laws if you can't implement them? Would it not again lead to the same inspectorage, corruption? Is it not better to leave it to the market, especially now that the government is committed to providing a basic minimum income? Pradeep?
Yeah, so I would concede to my good friend Gautam, with whom we have had evolved many things together. I don't think employers should be given the flexibility in terms of how they treat employees. There has got to be decorum, there has got to be dignity, there has got to be safety, there has got to be not minimum, at some point fair wage, there has to be social security. I think that's a contract which industry is shying away today, and I will get beaten up by my colleagues, but I think industry is taking shortcuts. I think there should be no flexibility in how you treat people. However, if I'm running an enterprise as an industry, I need flexibility who to hire, when to hire, for how long to hire, what skill set I need, how do I need to reskill people. Today, a lot of perversion is happening because I know if I hire somebody on my payroll, so more than 240 days, he or she is my permanent thing. So flexibility is not, again, vulgar. Flexibility is the ability to do. And why would I not have somebody for longer period if he or she is skilled, understand my business? I'll be stupid to be churning out people. So let's understand, industry is wanting resources for long term, and to Gautam's point is right. If I need 100 people, I take 30 on my payrolls and 70 on contract for some silly reasons because I'm doing cost arbitrage. That has to stop, but I do that because I know that if I make 70 and my business goes down, I can't get rid of them. So I'm totally agreeing on the point that give me flexibility to hire, but don't give me flexibility, pardon my thing, don't give me flexibility to play around with basic human things. And please let's understand, again I just want to say, Mythili, employers are also employees, save for a few owners and investors. We are all, I have done seven wage settlements, and I sit across in my course of my journey in the manufacturing, I sit across, I said, मैं भी कामगार हूँ, आप भी कामगार हैं, खाली मेरा collar white है, आपका blue है. So this belief that there is something very, and you know, I'll just close by saying, you know, industry has taken, they call HR as human relations for their white collar, and they call IR for industrial relation. I think it's sometimes inhuman relations. Inhuman relation is what we do. Yeah, I think we need to correct our attitude.
Absolutely. I think we need to rethink a lot of our premises. But Obik, because running out of time, I very quickly wanted to ask you that some of the state governments have moved in the direction of bringing about some kind of labor reform. Rajasthan being an example which comes to mind readily. What has been the experience on the ground? Have employers benefited? Have employees, more importantly, benefited? Obik?
Well, yes, Rajasthan took the lead in particularly in reforming the Industrial Relations Industrial Disputes Act. Similarly, other states have followed, like Madhya Pradesh, like Andhra Pradesh, a few others have followed. So, the experience is something that will have to be seen. Really, I do not have personal knowledge about whether industry has grown, whether there has been a lot of investment in Rajasthan because after following the reforms. But well, one thing this the economic survey points out that the Rajasthan model should be followed because it has brought about greater flexibility, greater industrialization. So, that is still to be really verified on the ground. I think but otherwise federal ecosystem should take care of a lot of things, because then states can take their own positions on these issues.
Sure. Gautam, I'll give you the last word, because as Pradeep mentioned, we're all workers. Some are blue, some are white, and if you're like me, you have no collar whatsoever. So what would you like to see by way of labour reform, and what has been your reaction to the Rajasthan experience? Very quickly, since we're running out of time. Gautam?
Well, the Rajasthan experience, what is easily demonstrable on the ground is today Rajasthan competes with Haryana as being the labour busting capital in the country. I mean, you know, responding to Mr. Bhargav's point that everybody is a worker, the point is, yes, how do you bridge the gap between those who earn 1 crore a year and a lakh of rupees a year? We're looking at unbelievable levels of inequality. So I don't think I mean, it's trivializing the problem of those who are at the bottom end, saying we're all workers, with due respect. I think we have to really address what are economic realities that have fundamental social and political outcomes in our society, of discrimination, of poverty, and you can only deal with that if you can meet material ends of people, to create a skilled workforce, to create an educated workforce that contributes effectively to society and not be hired and fired like cattle.
Oh, sure, Gautam, I would agree with you entirely, but the question is, it is not a case of hire and fire. Nobody is arguing for hire and fire. What everybody is arguing, including you, is for flexibility. Of course, the interpretation of flexibility could vary from person to person, and inequalities, I agree, are part of our society. But the solution to that is not by fiddling with labour law, but by the state doing its job of redistribution through taxes and things like minimum basic income support. But thank you very much, Gautam, Pradeep, and Obik, for joining me in this really fascinating discussion. Remember, we'll be back next week with yet another edition of Macros with Mythili. Till then, it's thank you and goodbye from all of us at ET Now.